The cold hum of the Eclipse's engines vibrated beneath Kiera Volkov's boots, a steady reminder that time was running out. On the bridge, a faint red light blinked from the communication console, another signal from the Drelk fleet. Another advance. The screen ahead of her showed the same bleak map of the sector, with the scattered remnants of humanity's defenses, weak, scattered, fading. She let out a long breath, staring at the ghostly shadows of their ships, barely hanging on by the thinnest thread. "We can't outrun them forever, Captain," said Lieutenant Marcus, his voice heavy with the truth of it. He stood beside her at the navigation console, his face grim, the lines of stress deepened with each passing day. His eyes were fixed on the map, but his words were directed at her. "Tell me something I don't know, Marcus," Kiera replied, her voice a low growl, her gaze unwavering from the holographic display. Her hands were clasped tightly behind her back, and her posture was as rigid as the weight of command on her shoulders. The Eclipse was the last of the Terran fleet, and she, its captain, was the last thing standing between humanity and complete annihilation. "Sir," the Drelk, Marcus started, but Kiera cut him off with a sharp gesture. She didn't need to hear it again. They'd seen the reports. The Drelk had destroyed half the colonies in the sector, and their fleet was now pushing forward at an unprecedented rate. "I know," she muttered. "I know." The silence in the bridge was thick, the weight of failure pressing down on them all. The last of humanity's forces were scattered across the galaxy like pieces of a shattered puzzle, and with every passing moment, they were being picked off one by one. The few ships that remained were all damaged beyond recognition, their crews barely holding on to their dwindling hope. Kiera glanced at the tactical console. The numbers were worse than she'd imagined, no reinforcements, no allies to call on. Just the Eclipse, her crew, and a steadily dwindling supply of fuel and ammunition. They were alone. Really alone. "I can't keep asking the crew to fight when there's no chance left," she muttered to herself, almost too quiet for Marcus to hear. "What do we do, Captain?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now, understanding the gravity of her words. "What's the plan?" Kiera's fingers twitched, but she resisted the urge to slam her fist into the console. There were no more plans. No more strategies. Just survival. And even that seemed like a stretch. "Prepare for battle stations," she ordered, her voice hardening with the finality of it. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." As the crew scrambled to their positions, the ship's alarms blared to life. Kiera turned toward the command chair, staring out the viewports at the stars stretching beyond, a vast, uncaring void. In the distance, she could already see the approaching shadows, the Drelk armada. She let out a sharp breath, her mind racing. There had to be something they hadn't tried. Some other option. Some impossible chance that could turn the tide. Then, as if the thought had been summoned, an idea took root in her mind. A dangerous idea. A reckless idea. An idea so absurd it could either be their salvation or their damnation. It was a long shot. A gamble that could backfire, but if it worked, it could give them the edge they so desperately needed. "Marcus," she said, her voice suddenly steady, "I need you to patch me into the comms system. Full ship-wide. Now." "Captain, what?" He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the look on her face. The familiar fire in her eyes had returned. It wasn't hope, it was a resolve that few could match. The kind of resolve that came only when there was nothing left to lose. He nodded, quickly tapping commands into the console. A moment later, the speakers crackled to life. "This is Captain Kiera Volkov of the Eclipse," her voice boomed across the ship. "Listen up, everyone. We've been fighting the Drelk for years. We've lost good men and women, we've lost colonies, ships, and resources. And now, we're facing our last stand. But I'm not going down without a fight. Neither are any of you." She paused, letting the silence settle in. Her crew needed to hear this, to know that their captain still believed in the fight, no matter how futile it seemed. "But I need to make something clear," Kiera continued, her voice taking on a darker edge. "I'm calling in a favor. Something dangerous. We're making contact with the Gathrix. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The Gathrix. The name itself sent a shiver down Kiera's spine. A species as ruthless as they came, with no real alliances or morals to speak of. They were predators, not allies. "Are you sure, Captain?" Marcus's voice cut through the radio silence. "You know what that means." "They're—" "I know," Kiera interrupted, her tone cold. "But the Drelk are closing in on us. We have no other choice." She turned, staring at the comms officer. "Send the signal. Now." Her voice was calm, but inside, she was anything but. The Gathrix were not to be trifled with. The last time they had crossed paths with humanity, it had ended in blood and carnage. But the Gathrix had their own ancient grudge with the Drelk. If she could get them to help, if they could be convinced to join the fight, there was a chance. A slim chance. "Signal is sent," the comms officer reported, his voice trembling. Kiera stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the decision. There was no turning back now. No second chances. If the Gathrix responded, and they might not, they would come with their own terms. They might not care about humanity's survival at all. But it was their only hope. "Now we wait," she said, her voice a whisper to herself, but loud enough for the crew to hear. "We wait and pray that they hear us." Outside, the Drelk fleet loomed closer, and the Eclipse braced for impact. The first step had been taken. The last gamble was in motion. Now, they could only hope the Gathrix responded, and that the price wouldn't be too high. The cold silence in the Eclipse was suffocating. Captain Kiera Volkov stood at the command console, her hands gripping the edge of the panel. The seconds stretched out like hours. Her eyes were fixed on the blinking lights of the communication system, waiting for a response. The entire ship felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for a sign, any sign, that the Gathrix had heard her plea. The Drelk were out there, right beyond the outer perimeter of the sector, and they were closing in. The fleet, once formidable, was a shadow of what it had been. Now, only the Eclipse remained. The rest of humanity's military had been wiped out, piece by piece. The Gathrix were humanity's last, desperate hope, but they weren't exactly known for their mercy. The message Kiera had sent was a gamble, one that might cost them everything if it failed. But as the minutes crawled by, the possibility of failure seemed to loom larger with every passing second. She couldn't bear to think of it. The Eclipse was all that was left of humanity, and if the Gathrix rejected the call, if they decided humanity wasn't worth their time, then it was over. Kiera glanced over her shoulder at Lieutenant Marcus, who stood by the tactical console. His eyes were as anxious as hers, though he was trying to hide it. They had been through countless battles together, but nothing felt as uncertain as this moment. He could see the tension in her face, the same uncertainty gnawing at her insides. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, breaking the silence. "The Drelk will be here in less than 15 minutes. We don't have much time." Kiera didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. Her mind was too occupied with the weight of her decision. The Gathrix were not like the Drelk. They were merciless, brutal, and entirely self-serving. They had no allegiance to humanity. They fought only for their own gain. But they had fought the Drelk before, and they had won. That was what made her desperate enough to make the call. The Gathrix, in all their savage glory, might be the only force capable of matching the Drelk's brutality. "I know," Kiera replied at last, her voice barely a whisper. "I know how much time we have." She took a deep breath, pushing the panic to the back of her mind. The crew was depending on her to lead them. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when the last thread of hope rested on her shoulders. Just as she turned back to the communication console, a sharp beep cut through the stillness. Her heart skipped a beat. The response. "Captain, the signal is coming through," the comms officer reported. His voice was shaky but eager. Kiera's pulse quickened. She could hear the distant hum of the signal as it filtered through the static. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. She nodded at the comms officer, signaling him to open the channel. "Put it through," she ordered, her voice firm despite the rising anxiety. The screen flickered, then settled into an image that made Kiera's blood run cold. The Gathrix did not appear in the usual holoforms like most other species. No, they were too primal for that. Their images were raw, almost tangible, a constant reminder of their terrifying physicality. The face of the Gathrix emissary appeared, its scaled skin gleaming in the dim light, its piercing yellow eyes locking onto Kiera's. The creature was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and its body was adorned with jagged spikes running along its spine, sharp enough to tear through metal. Its broad, muscular frame rippled with power. The Gathrix were living weapons, and they wore it like a badge of honor. The voice that emanated from the screen was deep, almost like a growl, vibrating with authority. "You dare to call us human?" The words felt like a challenge. The creature's lips curled into a grotesque smile, and for a moment, Kiera wondered if she had made a grave mistake. "This is Captain Kiera Volkov of the Eclipse," Kiera said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We are fighting the Drelk, and we have no chance of survival. We need your help. We are willing to pay any price." The Gathrix emissary tilted its head slightly, studying her. There was something calculating in its expression, as if it were weighing her words, savoring the desperation in her tone. "Pay any price," the Gathrix repeated, its voice laced with amusement. "You have nothing to offer that would be of value to us, human. You are nothing but ants beneath our feet." Kiera's throat tightened. She had known this would be difficult. The Gathrix didn't care for humanity's plight. They saw them as a nuisance at best, a race to be crushed underfoot at worst. But desperation had driven her to this point. If they couldn't convince the Gathrix, all was lost. "We have something you want," Kiera said, her voice low but firm. "The Drelk are your enemies, too. If we don't stop them, they'll take everything. Not just humanity, but your territory, your future. You'll have nothing left to fight for if they succeed." The Gathrix emissary's eyes narrowed. "The Drelk are not our concern. We do not ally with weaklings. You speak of territory and future as if you have something worth saving. You are not in a position to bargain." Kiera felt a cold sweat break out along her spine, but she held her ground. She could feel her crew watching her, waiting for the outcome of this critical moment. The weight of their hopes hung on her words. "What if we gave you something more than our fight?" she said, her mind racing. "What if we offered you access to their resources? Their technologies? You could destroy them from the inside out. We can help you take everything they've built. We'll give you what we have left, all of it. But we need your help now." The Gathrix emissary studied her in silence for a long moment, its expression unreadable. Then, slowly, it spoke. "You underestimate us, human. You believe we need your resources, your technologies. But we need nothing from you. If we help you, it will be because we find the hunt interesting." Kiera's stomach twisted. It wasn't a promise of help. It was a game. The Gathrix wanted to enjoy this battle. They saw it as nothing more than a challenge. "Then you will help us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," the Gathrix replied. "But remember this, human. You called us. You will pay the price for our assistance. And when the Drelk are destroyed, there will be nothing left for you to claim." The screen went black, the connection severed. Kiera stared at the empty screen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made the call. Now, they would face whatever consequences came with it. Marcus stood beside her, his face pale. "Captain, what now?" "Now," Kiera said quietly, her voice hardening, "we wait for the Gathrix to arrive. And we pray that we survive long enough to see the end of this war." Outside, the Drelk fleet continued its march toward the Eclipse, oblivious to the deadly alliance that had just been forged in the shadows. The decision had been made. There was no going back. Now, Kiera could only hope that the Gathrix would deliver, before it was too late. The Eclipse shuddered as the Drelk ships closed in. On the bridge, the crew had fallen silent, the atmosphere heavy with the knowledge that they were moments away from facing their annihilation. Kiera Volkov stood at the command console, her hands pressed against the cold, polished metal. Her heart beat in her chest like a war drum, a constant reminder that everything they had fought for would come to an end today. There was no turning back now. Outside the viewports, the darkness of space was split by the menacing silhouettes of the Drelk fleet. Their ships, massive and intimidating, loomed like a predator closing in on its prey. The Eclipse, alone and battered, was hopelessly outmatched. And yet, the crew still stood at their stations, preparing for what would surely be their final stand. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice a tight rasp, "they're almost in range. We don't have much time." Kiera nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the approaching enemy. She couldn't afford to be distracted now, not when the stakes were so high. The Drelk had been relentless in their pursuit, and now they were here to finish the job. The comms officer turned to her, his face pale. "Captain, we've received a transmission from the Gathrix. They've arrived." Her heart skipped a beat. The Gathrix. The brutal, merciless species who had agreed to fight alongside humanity. A cold sense of foreboding gripped her, but she pushed it aside. If they were going to survive this, they needed the Gathrix. And right now, they had no choice but to trust them. "Open the channel," Kiera ordered. The screen flickered, and a massive, hulking form appeared, one of the Gathrix. Its yellow eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity, its body covered in jagged, spiked armor. The creature's voice, low and guttural, rumbled from the speakers. "We are here, human," the Gathrix said, its tone laced with amusement. "Let us see if you are worthy of our aid." Kiera took a deep breath, trying to suppress the unease that threatened to rise within her. "We're counting on you," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "This is our final chance. We need you to fight with us, now." The Gathrix emissary paused, its expression unreadable. "The Drelk are not our only enemies," it said, its tone shifting. "But your plight has its uses. We will fight. For now. But remember, this is not an alliance. This is an agreement for mutual destruction." Kiera didn't respond. There was no need. The Gathrix had made their terms clear. They were in this fight for their own reasons, and they would leave when they had no more interest in the war. But for now, they were their only hope. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice tight, "the Drelk are within range. We're outnumbered 10-1. Kiera took one final look at the Drelk fleet, their ships closing in like a storm. The odds were impossible. There was no strategy, no chance for a traditional victory. It would come down to one thing: survival. They couldn't win this fight. They could only hope to survive long enough for the Gathrix to make their move. "Prepare to engage," she commanded, her voice sharp. The crew moved into action. The Eclipse shuddered as its weapon systems came online, and the hum of the engines deepened, filling the bridge with a low, vibrating thrum. Kiera took her seat at the command chair, her fingers tightening around the armrests. The ship's systems were old, battered, but they were still functional. For now. "Targeting systems are locked," the weapons officer reported, his voice tight with fear. "Ready to fire." Kiera nodded, her gaze fixed on the massive Drelk ships. They were closing in fast. The first blast of energy tore through the air, a brilliant flash of light, and the Eclipse lurched violently to one side as the shields absorbed the impact. Alarms blared, and the entire ship rattled under the force of the strike. "They're firing back," the tactical officer shouted. "Shields at 40%. We can't take another hit like that." Kiera gritted her teeth. "Return fire. Do whatever you can to hold them off." The Eclipse fired again, its weapons systems sending out powerful beams of energy that ripped through the Drelk ships, but the damage was minimal. The Drelk were relentless, their return fire devastating. Another blast hit the Eclipse, and the entire ship shook. The lights flickered, and the crew braced themselves for the next hit. "Captain, shields are down to 20%, the tactical officer reported, his voice strained. "We're taking heavy damage." Kiera's mind raced. They couldn't keep this up for long. They had no chance of winning this battle. But the Gathrix, she had to trust the Gathrix. They were their last hope. And then, just as the Eclipse was about to take another hit, something happened. The dark sky outside the viewports was suddenly lit with blinding energy. A massive shockwave rippled through space, and the Drelk ships froze, their weapons going silent. The Gathrix had arrived. The massive ships of the Gathrix loomed out of the darkness, their hulls covered in spiked, obsidian-like armor. The Eclipse shook as the Gathrix unleashed their own weapons, massive beams of energy that tore through the Drelk ships with ease. The Gathrix attacked with savage precision, their ships moving like a deadly dance, tearing through the Drelk armada. The Drelk, caught off guard, attempted to retaliate, but their weapons were no match for the Gathrix's overwhelming power. Ship after ship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, disintegrating in the blink of an eye. Kiera watched in stunned silence as the Drelk fleet was torn apart, their forces collapsing under the might of the Gathrix. Target the remaining ships, the Gathrix emissary's voice echoed through the speakers. Finish them. The remaining Drelk ships scattered, trying to escape, but it was too late. The Gathrix were relentless, cutting through their ranks like a hot knife through butter. The Eclipse's weapons fired again, this time with the support of the Gathrix's superior firepower, and the last of the Drelk ships were obliterated. As the battle drew to a close, Kiera felt a strange sense of disbelief wash over her. The Gathrix had done it, they had wiped out the Drelk in a matter of minutes. The sky outside was now silent, the once terrifying fleet of the Drelk nothing more than debris floating in the void. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. We're alive." Kiera didn't answer immediately. She could still hear the hum of the Eclipse's engines, the calm that had followed the chaos. They had survived. They had won, but at what cost? The Gathrix had saved them, but they had made no promises beyond the battle. Kiera knew that their help came with a price, one they would likely have to pay sooner or later. "Don't get comfortable," Kiera said, her voice steady. "We're alive, but we're still at their mercy. Don't forget that." The Gathrix emissary's image flickered on the screen again. "You have won this day, human. But remember, your survival is a temporary thing. The Drelk are no longer your concern. But we are a different kind of hunter. And we will come for you when the time is right." The screen went black. Kiera stared at the empty display, her heart heavy with the realization that the battle was over, but the war was far from finished. They had survived, for now. But the future was uncertain. The Eclipse drifted through the wreckage of the battle, its crew left to face the consequences of their survival. The Gathrix had kept their word, but Kiera knew that this victory had come at a cost. And the price was yet to be paid. The aftermath of the battle was quiet, eerily quiet. The Eclipse floated in the stillness of space, surrounded by the charred remnants of the Drelk fleet. The ship's hull was battered, its systems barely holding together after the brutal assault. The crew, though relieved to be alive, couldn't shake the feeling that the real war was only just beginning. Kiera Volkov stood at the bridge, staring at the swirling debris in front of her. The Gathrix had wiped out the Drelk with terrifying efficiency, but there was no celebration. No relief. Just a heavy silence that pressed down on her chest. They had survived, but at what cost? "Captain," Marcus's voice broke the silence. He stood by the tactical station, his face drawn and pale from the intensity of the battle. "We've completed damage assessments. The Eclipse is still operational, but barely. Shields are down, engines are compromised. We won't be able to make another jump until we get repairs." Kiera nodded, not surprised. The ship had taken a beating, and they'd already pushed it past its limits. But that was a problem for later. Right now, they had bigger concerns. "I'm more worried about the Gathrix," Kiera said, her voice low. "They saved us today, but we can't forget that they're not doing this out of the kindness of their hearts." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "You think they're going to want something in return?" Kiera's eyes narrowed, her thoughts already racing. "I'm certain of it. The Gathrix don't fight for free. They'll come for something. We just don't know what yet. As if on cue, the comms officer's voice rang out, sharp and urgent. Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the Gathrix. Kiera's stomach tightened. She had hoped for a few moments of peace before the inevitable demand came, but it seemed the Gathrix had no intention of letting them rest. Put it through, she said, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her insides. The screen flickered to life, and the towering form of the Gathrix emissary appeared once again. This time, there was no mistaking the glint of calculation in its yellow eyes. The creature was not here for pleasantries, it was here for business. You live, human, the Gathrix growled, its voice like gravel scraping against metal. For now. But there is a price for your survival. Kiera braced herself, her hands clenched at her sides. We're grateful for your help, but we're not looking for a handout. What do you want? The Gathrix tilted its head, its sharp, reptilian features twitching with amusement. You speak as if your survival is something you can bargain for. But your kind is weak. You needed us to destroy your enemies. And now you will owe us. Marcus shot Kiera a worried glance, but she held his gaze, her mind already calculating their next move. What do you want from us? She asked again, her tone firm. The Gathrix's smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. You will assist us. The Drelk are but one threat in this galaxy. There are others, other races, other enemies. We require your ship and your crew to help us hunt them. In exchange, you may live. Kiera's heart skipped a beat. She had known it would come to this, but hearing the Gathrix speak so plainly about their intentions sent a cold chill through her. They weren't offering a partnership, they were demanding a servitude. A mercenary contract, with no room for negotiation. We don't fight for anyone but humanity, Kiera said, her voice steady, but her mind was already racing. She needed a way out, a way to buy them time. The Eclipse was barely functional, and the crew was exhausted from the battle. They couldn't afford to be dragged into another war, not now. The Gathrix's eyes gleamed as it stepped closer to the screen, its massive form looming over them. You misunderstand, human. You will fight because you have no choice. You will fight because we will not let you go. The Drelk were only one of many. And if you do not assist us in our hunts, your species will cease to exist. Kiera felt the weight of those words settle like a lead ball in her chest. There was no room for negotiation. The Gathrix didn't care about humanity's survival, they cared about using humanity as a tool for their own agenda. She had gambled with the survival of her people, and now, that gamble had come with a price that was more than she could afford. I won't let you use us as cannon fodder, Kiera said, her voice rising. We've fought our own battles, and will continue to do so. If you want our help, you'll need to offer something more than threats. The Gathrix's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, emotionless stare. You do not understand, human. This is not a negotiation. This is a fact. You will fight. You will serve us. Or you will die. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Kiera stood frozen, the weight of the Gathrix's words sinking in. They had no choice. They had survived the Drelk, but their survival had come at the price of their autonomy. The Gathrix would not allow them to walk away unscathed. Captain, Marcus said after a long pause, his voice hesitant, what now? Kiera swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had made a decision that had saved her crew, but now that decision was threatening to tear them apart. The Gathrix were not allies, they were conquerors, and they would not stop until they had what they wanted. We have no choice, Kiera said quietly. We'll have to fight for them, for now. But we won't be their pawns forever. We'll find a way to break free. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. The Gathrix were powerful, and they would hold the Eclipse and her crew captive until they had served their purpose. They would be forced into their service, forced to fight against enemies they had no interest in battling. Kiera looked at her crew, their faces pale and exhausted, but determined. They had survived the Drelk, but now they faced an even greater challenge, finding a way to free themselves from the Gathrix's grip. For the first time in a long while, Kiera wasn't sure what the future held. She had led her people through countless battles, but this was a war she hadn't prepared for. The Gathrix were a threat unlike any they had faced before. And now, they would be forced to fight, not just for survival, but for their freedom. The Eclipse drifted into the unknown, the crew bound to the Gathrix's demands. The battle against the Drelk was over, but the real fight had only just begun.